All right, well, let's get started. Glad you're here. Hope you've been surviving the rain. Got some good rain. We got 1.5 inches at our house, which was great because most of the time the storms come, the rain comes, it gets to our house and it goes, and it keeps going. So right on the other side of the road, I could reach out and touch the rain, but then it skips over. So we were happy to get some rain there. Yeah, we're continuing our study, Words That Matter. Last time we talked about hell, and this time we're going to talk about the serpent. So make those two will overlap a little bit as we will see. So the premise of it, once again, as means of introduction, the idea is we're looking at religious words or words with very religious connotation that have upon them couple thousand years worth of meaning, some meaning that wasn't really originally intended, but just as time progresses, words carry a baggage of meaning, some of it positive, some of it negative, and not only that, there's also translation struggles, which I promise you it is a struggle to translate, and so we're trying to look through that. Then also, like Hollywood and other stuff takes certain words and runs with it. An example. So we're currently at OC. This is finals week. Right, so we're getting through that. Students are, some students dealing better with it than others. You can just see it in their eyes. But I was... At OC, they have this thing that they did not have when I was in school, and they call it Spa Day. All right, there's 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, where they have a bunch of different snacks, and they have tables with all the way from coloring to Legos. They had one with, you could pot your own little succulent cactus-looking plant. I guess that's if you need a friend. I don't know. So you could pot your own. They had a little coffee bar thing. They also have, you could sign up and get a 10-minute massage. Man, where was that when I was crying in the corner and sucking my thumb during finals week, right? So anyway, I make the best of it too. I go. I'm stressed, so. And I was in line there getting, I think I had gotten to the place where I was getting the dry mangoes. And this one student was right across the table. And I was like, hey, how's your week going? Good, yeah. She's a nursing major. And she goes, oh, yeah, I got a quick question. It's like, oh, okay, shoot. And she goes, yeah, some of us were talking. So in the Bible, you see these demons and demon possession and people with mental illness today, are they possessed? And I was like, what's your quick question? I was just wanting the mangoes. I'm just going to walk off. So that caused me more anxiety. I went and signed up for a massage after that. So words matter, right? Words matter. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the word snake. The word snake. So let's walk ourselves there. And of course, the first time the word snake is used in the Bible, yes, look at y'all, Genesis. So in Genesis chapter 3, we have the introduction of this one weird character thing. It's a snake that talks and some kind of walking around a tree. And it says there in chapter 3, verse 1, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Right, let's pause that for a second. Okay, in the ancient world, here's how they understood, I think, Genesis 1 and 2. So when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, there in verse 1 of chapter 1, and I've made this point before, it's not yet talking about like where the birds fly and this clump of rock. It's talking about two realms, two realities. So the world of God, the spiritual realm, and then he creates the physical realm. I want you to think of it as two circles. And they're not apart, they're not completely separate from each other, right? They actually overlap. And where they overlap is the garden. Okay, so there the two worlds are connected. Colliding might be too strong, but they're connected. And in that, so think of the garden, it's not the Garden of Eden, the garden in Eden, and think of it as a high place. So the garden's kind of on a mountaintop, and that's what connects to the world of God. And God then, when it starts talking about like the stars and the moon and the celestial being, it's not really only talking about the sun, the stars, as you and I can see it and think about it. Those are representation of the celestial, divine, these other spiritual beings. And they co-rule the heavens. God's in charge, and he has his spiritual beings that do different things, which are later called the sons of God. And they help rule the cosmos with God, right? God's in charge, and he has all this help. What about this physical reality here? Who's going to represent God here? It's these mud creatures, these bags of dirt with the breath of God, which is us. And the spiritual beings in their power and glory, right? Because they are kind of like stars, and so they shine, and they're just amazing. If you read Psalm 8, it talks about how humanity, who is humanity? Like, what are they but dust? And yet God has elevated them. So these mud creatures are elevated to not just rule on this plane, but to actually represent the image of God. They're God-bearing, they bear the image of God. So God has elevated them even above these spiritual beings. And there's a creature introduced in the story, created by God, that represents a spiritual being. Later in the story, it will be called many other things. Satan. Satan's not a name. It's a description. The devil, Lucifer, Beelzebub. None of those are names. They're all descriptors of different characteristics of the spiritual being. This spiritual being is unhappy that a mud creature is going to rule and have more greatness than the other spiritual celestial beings. Because of that, we have Genesis 3. Okay? And this creature is, like I said, think of the garden, the high place, and that's why from there forward, even in the ancient mind, high places were where you access the gods. Later, when you come to the Tower of Babel, it's an attempt to be a garden-like experience. We're going to get up to the heavens. We're going to try to get up where the gods are, but it's through the influence of evil instead of the way God did it in the garden. So it's a whole rabbit hole, but we don't have time for that. So here's this serpent creature. Why a serpent? Why a snake? Why not a giraffe? Hippopotamus? I don't know, what's another scary looking thing? Alligator. An alligator, yeah. A chihuahua. Those kind of freak me out. Why not a little nervous, kind of shaking, ticking, chihuahua that's runs around and then pees on you and okay, why a serpent? Well, there's a reason. There's a reason. And the reason is because in the ancient world, serpents, snakes were already creatures that carried a meaning. Okay, they were already symbolic of things. For example, in the Mesopotamian word, or in other words, Babylon, which is very important to the story because Babylon, the Tower of Babel, in it, you can hear it in English. Babel, Babylon, Babylene, which is one of the, actually in English also sounds like it's supposed to in Hebrew. The Tower of Babel is a comparison story to Genesis 1, where instead of what God is creating up to the heavens, this people group is trying to get up to the heavens, and instead of bearing the image of God, they're trying to place themselves with the gods. And so it's a parallel story, and the Tower of Babel is a satire of the beginning of the Babylonian Empire. So there's a whole layer there. So that's why the Babylonian story, the creation story of Babylon, included a serpent, a watery serpent, snake-looking creature that was called Tiamat. And it was the watery serpent creature that was a goddess of chaos. So in the ancient story, which was the same time Genesis is circulating, you have a creation story of Babylon that was a pretty big power broker in that region. And their creation story has the goddess of chaos, which has to be slain by one of their top gods, Marduk, who on this cosmic battle slays her, fillets her down the middle, and through her guts and organs and things, helps create the heavens and the earth and all that's in it. And so by slaying chaos, you bring order. You with me? Okay, hold that thought. The Egyptians, which are another power broker, right, throughout the storyline, their creation story included one of the goddesses, which was the goddess Wadjet, who was a serpent goddess. And this serpent goddess was actually regarded as the protector of Egypt and its people and the guardian of the cosmos to ward off chaos. So you have two different, one is a symbol of chaos, the other one is a symbol of protection against chaos. The pharaohs would wear it on their little headpiece, and only the top rulers of Egypt could wear it because it symbolized they were representatives of order with the protection of the serpent. Okay? That gives another whole layer to the thing in Exodus 7, right, where Moses and Aaron showed up. And the very first thing that's going to show to Pharaoh that God is with Moses is take your staff, Aaron, throw it on the ground, and it's going to become a snake. In that culture, the symbol of protection to a people, right? In this case, Egypt, the symbol of protection to Egypt against chaos. And then the Pharaoh, probably wearing its little thing, tells his enchanters, do the same, and they do their version of it. It's like, we have two. Like, we really have the protection of Wadjet. Except their Wadjets get eaten by the staff of Aaron. And so that isn't just some random thing, which would be cool already. Look, my staff turns into a snake. It is who you think is protecting you is actually under the control of our God, and it just eats their protection away. Okay, so then there's that. All right. So back to Genesis. So if you're an ancient reader of Genesis, when you see that there is a serpent-like creature talking to humanity, you could take it one of two ways. Ooh, this could be like a protection from their God, which is kind of how Adam and Eve takes it up front. They don't run off. They don't get a stick and start beating it. They don't scream. They have a conversation with it. And it seems reasonable and it seems wise, which actually the word translated crafty can also be translated wise. That the serpent was the wisest of God's creatures. If you really want to put a spin on all this, the word seraphim, which are these cosmic bouncers that are floating around protecting God from the riffraff, right, is the word serpent with wings. So you're like, so they had a place, or a serpent had a place in God's rule. And they were meant to be protectors. So you're like, ooh, wait, the serpent here, maybe it's a good thing. But if you're a Babylonian, you'd be like, oh, chaos is returning, which is also true in the story. It starts out as something to be trusted, but then it becomes an agent of chaos. You with me so far? Am I losing anybody yet? Okay. So, because of that, chaos in the story of Genesis, I've made this point to you, and I'm sure you're tired of it. The story of Genesis begins with this physical realm chaotic. And it's the Spirit of God hovering over it that pushes chaos out and brings order. Unlike the story of Babylon, where their God had to have a life and death and almost lost, a fight against Tiamat, so that then order could be established. Here, the very Spirit of God hovering over it, just this gentle spirit, this gentle breeze, slays chaos. Funny thing or interesting thing in the story of Babylon, the way that Marduk actually beats Tiamat is with a violent wind. He basically presses her against the mountain kind of thing, and then he slays her. So in the story of Genesis, you're like, there's a wind, but it's a gentle breeze, and that's enough because God is just that powerful. So it's a compare and contrast. The modern reader is like, oh, see, the Bible borrowed it from all these stories. That's just not the right way to think of it. Is the story of the Bible is selecting language that communicates with the competing stories of that day, right? If it was going to be presented today, it probably would have used different language to describe, in my opinion, real events, but phrased in a way that made sense to them. To us, you kind of have to understand it, pick through it all, because it doesn't make that much sense to us. Okay, so the consequences then, Adam and Eve, they listen. So what was supposed to be a symbol of protection, the serpent, the seraphim, becomes a symbol of chaos. And then Eve is deceived, and then she deceives. So now humanity is acting as agents of chaos, not as image bearers of God. They become agents of chaos. They're deceived, thus they deceive. And it just goes downhill from there. Then, after that, the rest of Genesis 3 is a description of what happens when chaos returns. And it's intense. It's a whole lot of... And this is what I want to focus on, verse 14 and 15. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat the dust of all the days of your life. And I will put enmity or conflict between you and the woman, and between your offsprings and her. So there's going to be descendants of the serpent and descendants of Eve that are going to be in conflict with each other. And eventually, now he's talking about one person. He, a descendant of humanity, will crush the descendants of the serpent, but it'll come at the cost of his life. Spoiler alert, Jesus, just in case you're not sure where that goes. Okay, a couple cool things here. I don't think the dust thing is accidental, because humanity are basically bags of dust. We're like the dirt people. But because God's presence was with us, it elevated us. The serpent was unhappy with the fact that dirt people are being elevated, so now the serpent gets cast down to the dirt.
Never been called a dirt bag before.
Oh, that's all right, yeah. That's kind of complicated, but does that make sense? Why the serpent goes to the dust? It's punishment. It's God being ironic. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes.
I can't remember where I heard it at, but I was at a Bible class, and the teacher there, we were going over Genesis, and he said that through his study, he believed that the serpent actually was not a snake-like looking creature.
Mm-hmm.
It looked totally different than what we consider a serpent or a snake now. He believed that it actually walked and talked.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Form, but it was some sort of form, because he could communicate and he walked and everything else, and that's when they committed the sin. That's when God said, "Cursed are you, you shall eat dust all the days of your life," and that's when he actually became the snake or the serpent that we picture now when they say serpent.
And that could be, like I said, the word seraphim is like these winged serpents that are definitely not like your, little slithering snake. So it could have been, it was meant to be more. But as consequences, it goes down to the dirt because it was jealous of the dirt people, right? Of us. Not dirt bags, bags of dirt. It's a very important distinction. Yeah, another weird thing, so let's talk about some Hebrew here. The Hebrew for the word snake that is translated here in Genesis 3:1 is nahesh, which is actually the word for your garden variety snake, like a snake. Which I wonder if what God is doing here is like Tiamat is this grand, not your garden snake. It's this big cosmic beast, snake, dragon-looking thing that is bringing chaos, and trying to bring chaos into the world. Well, actually, when God looks at it, it's just like a garden snake that God can just, right? So it's like bringing down the significance of the serpent and raising up the power of God. Because there's another Hebrew word for cosmic beast, serpent-like thing. And it's not just the word seraphim, because that's more divine. It's the word tanin, back page there. So, which is a weird thing, which is interesting. When it talks about Aaron's staff turning into a serpent, it's not using the garden varieties, nahesh. It's using the beastly, cosmic, mythological, huge, tanin. Does that make sense? Because the point being there that God is a God that controls your garden variety snake or controls the cosmic, beastly, snake-looking creature. And so the tanin of God is actually more powerful than the wajets, the snakes of Egypt that are supposed to be protecting them. And the irony of the 10 plagues is that God is showing Egypt that actually their order, their world order, is chaos. They're oppressing Israel. They're about destruction. They're not about the kind of snakes that protect. They're actually about the kind of snakes that are, or the snake that is about chaos. They're doing the will of evil, not the version of their protection snake. Does that make sense? So the 10 plagues are supposed to unmask that. It's to deconstruct the illusion. They are agents of chaos, even though they thought they were under the protection of a snake. So back to Nahesh, another cool thing about that, it's the word for garden variety snake, but interesting enough, it's also a play on the word used for divination. So when you're involved in divination or witchcraft or that, what you're really doing is calling for the snake to come be with you, which is, I think, a really cool little turn of the phrase there in Hebrew to say, when you do divination, you're really about evil. You're asking evil to come into your life. So yeah, there is some power in that, but you're messing with the snake. Does that make sense? So that's another cool play in words. Any question about Nahesh or Tanin?
No.
Yes.
Thinking about the snake reminds me of Yule Brenner and the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
They thought the snake was going to protect, but Charleston Heston was there. Kept waiting for him to pull out a gun and some boots or something, but okay. The word tanin, like I said, it's not just a garden variety snake. It's this mythological, beastly-looking dragon snake creature. Okay, so it personifies more than just a snake. It personifies evil, power, destruction. And it's actually used to describe Egypt in Ezekiel 29. And it's also used to describe King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in Jeremiah 51. So they are agents of evil. And it's also going to be used later, but then not in Hebrew, but in Greek. But the imagery, to me, is crystal clear, of the Empire of Rome later in the story. So the Tanin can be a mythical creature, or it can also just personify evil. It can be used to describe a government or a leader or an empire.
How about the Pharisees?
The Pharisees? Yes, we're getting there. Yeah, hold that thought. Okay, so what about the destructive power of the snake, right? So in Genesis 3, verse 14 and 15, it talks about that the power of the snake is going to, you've unleashed chaos. Who unleashed chaos on this reality? Humanity. We opened the door. We just gave it an opening. So in Micah chapter 7, Israel there, the kingdom by now has divided on the other side of Solomon, and the Assyrians are coming. They're going to destroy the north, which called themselves Israel, which included 10 tribes. Samaria is the capital. And Micah is during that time, right? Micah is during that time. And through Micah, God's giving some warnings. And so here's an example, Micah 7, 2 through 4. The faithful have been swept from the land. No one upright person remains. Not one upright person remains. Everyone lies in wait to shed blood. They hunt each other with nets. Both hands are skilled in doing evil. The ruler demands gifts. The judge accepts bribes. The powerful dictate what they desire. They all conspire together. It's a broken, corrupt, messed up system. Like a lot of the things we live out in the world today. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright, worse than a thorn hedge. The day of God visits you has come. Well, that sounds like fun. The day of God's visit. Yeah, not if you're about to be punished. The day your watchmen sound the alarm. Now is the time of your confusion. So that's Micah. In verse 16 through 18, what's going to happen? The nations will see and be ashamed, deprived all of their power. So God's going to eventually come do some stuff. They will put their hands over their mouths and their ears will become deaf. They will lick dust like a nahesh. Like creatures that crawl on the ground, they will come trembling out of their dens. They will turn in fear of the Lord our God and will be afraid of you. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression? Now talking about God's people and the remnant of his inheritance. You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy, except the agents of evil are going to be brought down to lick the dust, just like Nahash was. Right? So it's connecting you back to Genesis. What God did with evil then, God's going to do with the nations that follow evil now. And they're just going to be brought down to dust. Right? Now we move a few years forward. Now we're talking about King Nebuchadnezzar and the destruction of the south, which they called themselves Judah. 2 tribes divided down south. Jerusalem as the capital. Now we're about 587 before Jesus. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He has devoured us. He has thrown us into confusion. He has made us an empty jar like a serpent, like Tanin. He has swallowed us and filled his stomach with our delicacies, and he has spewed us out. In other words, it's connecting you with Genesis. King Nebuchadnezzar did the work of chaos. He swallowed humanity, or at least this version of humanity, but made the violence done to our flesh be on Babylon. Now Jeremiah is talking about the eventual punishment of Babylon. Says the inhabitants of Zion, may our blood be on those who believed or lived in Babylon, says Jerusalem. So eventually God's going to punish Babylon because they were agents of evil. They were about chaos. Then back to Isaiah, or talking about Isaiah, which overlaps with Micah. It's about the same time. Isaiah not only gave warnings and explanation to why the north was being destroyed, also kind of warning the south to repent, which they did. Eventually they were destroyed by the Babylonians, but not by the Assyrians. He also wrote a lot about God's going to fix all this one day. Okay? So he's probably the one of the prophets that wrote most about the fixing of it, right? Hope in a future representative of God. And here's one of those. See, I will create a new heavens and a new earth. Now, once again, how is the story, how did it begin? The world of God, the world of humanity, connected and overlapping at a key point. In that particular Genesis, it was the garden, right? It was Eden, the garden in Eden, and the tree of life. So there's that connecting point. Because of evil and chaos, that has been separated. We live in a world where we're over here figuring out this mess, and the presence of God did not overlap as much. When you have the temple, it's God having a connecting point to overlap, or at least a place to access. Jesus is Eden, the Garden of Eden, redone. He is the connecting point of the two worlds. And now you and I get to also be connecting points because we're taking Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the good news to others. But what God is going to do on the other side of humanity, the other side of this mess, is he's going to create a new reality where these places overlap. I'm still working on what does all that mean. I think the imagery of There's hell burning over here, and heaven over here, and earth's in the middle somewhere, and then some folks going to go burn down there, and some other people are going to go float up here, and earth is just going to, I don't know. I think it's more complex than that. I'm still working on what that all means, but the idea, the imagery of Genesis is going to be redone somehow. Does that mean we're still going to have some kind of physical-ish? I don't know. That's where I'm thinking. I'm still thinking. But something's going to be redone. Okay? And he uses imageries of Genesis. So I will create a new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, so this mess we're in, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create a Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. Delight is exactly what Eden means. The garden of delight. So there's going to be a new Jerusalem. I don't know if that's some kind of physical existence or just the imagery of a new Jerusalem, but it's going to be an existence of delight. Once again, connecting you to Genesis. And its people, a people of joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem, and I will take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. So this is good news. Whatever's going to happen on the other side of eternity, he's using imageries of Genesis, and he's talking about Jerusalem because Jerusalem was to be the connecting place between a broken world and the presence of God. The temple was there. Now, it became more about evil than it did about God as history unfolded. In Isaiah 65, verse 23 to 25, they will not labor in vain, so talking about this new world, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune. Israel, 600 years of Israel's existence was misfortune, at least 600 years. And so people were having children in a world of misfortune, right? And so that's not going to be the case on the other side of eternity, for they will be a people blessed by God, they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. And here's a description of that world. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. So, in other words, there's not going to be one thing eating another thing. The lion will eat straw like the ox, and the dust will be the serpent's food. So evil will still be in the dust on the other side of eternity. Completely in the dust. You might call hell. So evil's not going to come out of that. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountains. So evil then will not be a thing. It won't be floating around. It won't be whatever the seraphim were meant to be. It won't be the snake talking to anybody. It will just be in the ground and it'll be done. It won't be a problem. Okay, so that's kind of some of the Old Testament prophetic, describing their current moment, using language of the past to talk about a better future. Well, how about we get to Jesus? In Matthew 23, there's 7 woes that Jesus gives. This is the last week of Jesus in Jerusalem leading up to the cross. Jerusalem, once again, was supposed to be the connecting point of 2 worlds, but it became a place of evil. One of these woes is this, 23, verse 29, 33. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, that were supposed to be representatives of God. You hypocrites, you build tombs for the prophets and you decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophet. Now, we wouldn't have been agents of the serpent. Don't we all do that? We look back at our history and we're like, well, weren't those people stupid? If I was there, I wouldn't have done that. So you testify against yourself that you are indeed the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. So go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started, which he's talking about killing him, right? They're going to kill Jesus. Remember Genesis 3:15? What did God say? That the descendants of the serpent were going to be at odds with the descendants of God, and eventually one would crush the serpent at the cost of his life. Who is he speaking to here? Pagans? Atheists? The Babylonians? No, those that claim to be the very people of God. Look at the irony of that. They are the serpent children. And how does he say that? You snakes, you brood of vipers. How will you escape being condemned to hell? Like, how are you going to escape what happened to the serpent in Genesis? You are the descendants of the serpent. And I think that's why he uses brood of vipers. There's a lot of other ways to offend folks, if that's what you're going for. Yeah, I mean, you're ugly and your mama's breath stings. I mean, there's a lot of things you could say. He says brood of vipers. You are the children of the snake. In John's account, he just dismisses these pleasantries and he says, your father's the devil. He just flat out says it. Then when we get to, we got 5 minutes. Okay, when we get to Revelation, I think this is giving us a glimpse, a commentary on Genesis. Like, how did the serpent, which was created by God, possibly to be a protector, somehow becomes the devil, right? Well, the war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, which is another word for serpent. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. Well, they were cast down to the dust. The great dragon was hurled down. That's the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. And when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman. So here's personifying humanity, Eve with her descendants. So he's pursued the children of God, is what it's saying, because it was going to give birth to a male child. Now talking about Jesus. Then the dragon, or the serpent, was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offsprings, the church, or followers of Jesus, those who kept God's commands and hold fast to the testimony about Jesus. So if you're going to understand Revelation, you have to understand the backstory. You have to. Then the new heavens and new earth. Here, John is connecting with the prophets that we already read. I saw a new heaven, I saw a new earth. From the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. In the ancient world, where's Tiamat come out of? The sea. Where does, in Daniel chapter 7, there's a vision of these beastly kings. Where do they come out of? The sea. So the sea, you and I like to go to the beach and have a beach house, not the ancient world. That's where scary looking, dragon-like serpent monsters come out of. So in the new heavens and the new earth, there's no place for that to happen. There's no opening for them to come into the world. Okay, so there's no sea. Then there's the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down. And okay, we'll skip that. 2 Corinthians 11. Here's Paul giving a warning, and he connects to the imagery. He's talking to this church. But I'm afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Is evil still doing a Genesis 3 thing? Yes. Don't you be deceived just because you sit in a church building that bears the name of Christ, that you might not be agents of the serpent. That's what he's saying to them. We need to be a little more vigilant, and maybe less. We need to be a little more humble. So, quickly, let's apply this to us. I think today we got to be careful that the serpent is still being crafty. It's still deceiving. It deceived God's people, as in even Adam. It deceived God's people, as in Israel. it deceived God's people, as in the very leaders of Israel who killed Jesus. It tried to deceive Jesus. I'm pretty sure it's still trying to deceive us. And I think we always need to ask ourselves, are we acting like children of the serpent, or are we acting like children of God? Those are the options. We could be that brood of vipers, or we could be children of God. Because I guarantee you that we don't want to be dust eaters. We just don't. Next class, we're going to talk about Ben Adam, which means son of humanity, which is often translated son of man, which is Jesus' favorite self-expression. And we're going to talk about how do we connect all that with Jesus. Hint, we're going to go back to Genesis. All right, everybody, go ye and don't be a dust eater.